All right, well, I think I'm live. So tonight's Jiu-Jitsu prime time is going to be a little short because most of my special guests are kind of tied up and busy, and again, it's a little late. So figure we'd check in a little bit, and I think we're just going to go ahead and start. I had actually somebody asking me for one of my older videos on how to deal, with head-arm triangle defenses, and can you give me a different option like when they already hop to the other side? Because typically, more often than not, in a head arm triangle, you know, people still, the majority of the time, are going to hop over. And, this becomes one of those things that I figure, play something. This is one of my older content videos that's on my YouTube channel. And, I can go over it from there. So let's see. Without further ado, let's see if I get this thing right. I'm pausing this here for a second because you're going to see something that becomes very important with how we're setting this thing up, and this ties back into a lot of what shows up into that integral jujitsu and integral combat methods formula that I've put together. So again, this is just one of those things that this is a static position, and again, more often than not, when we look at jujitsu, when we learn a move, it's like, well, what if they do this? Well, what if they do this? Well, what if they do this? So typically, when we learn jujitsu, we end up doing stuff. I found my old whiteboard, and we'll use that for today. Um, but the major thing that we end up learning, or we get asked a lot, is this following question. So we get here, and we get what if, and that's typically followed by what if they move their arm this way, or what if they counter this way, and what if they do all these other things. And typically, when we associate this question of what if, it's typically a single answer that most people are looking for. Well, what if they do this? And when we start to learn, it's going to be actually easier, I think, to appreciate that, because then it's giving you, if one person does this in step 1A, then this is how you deal with stuff in 1B. And why, again, does that become very important? Because realistically, when we learn jujitsu and when we practice a lot of these things, we go, step 1 is control the arm. Step 2 is hop to the other side. Well, the interesting thing is if my opponent actually does what they need to do to survive that position, or at least deal with it, we never get to step 2, because in this equation of jujitsu, it's two people right now, and then obviously if the scenarios increase, but there's still an interaction with somebody. So realistically, when we get back to the idea that mixed martial arts and jujitsu is a science, well, again, we have to account, when we start getting into this, for two people. So we should really start looking at, you're getting the reflection of the ring light, but that's to make my lighting a little bit easier, for 1A and 1B. So again, it's great that we have this question of what if, but I think one of the interesting things that you can do is that if you adjust that question of what if to why would somebody try to hop over or wiggle their body or do certain things. Why would starts to open up multiple scenarios that now conceptually there are things that are going to overlap that hopefully will make it easier for you to kind of look at something. Like, for again, an example here, you know maybe it's we're trying to separate the head and left arm, and more so specifically the left upper arm, away from the right. And maybe by hopping over, why would they hop over? To hopefully, increase the pressure as well as the separation of the head and the left arm away from the right arm. So if we start looking at some of these principles, now it becomes one of those things that becomes a little bit easier to start to look at problem solving and going ahead and saying, like, how do I address this problem? Because here's another thing about jiu-jitsu. When we look at jiu-jitsu, it's one of those things where when we have a problem, well, we need to have an answer or solution for it. Well, the thing is, the question's always changing. And if the question's always changing and we assume the answer, sometimes it's not the right answer. And more so than that, it could actually be really the wrong answer of what's going on. So again, this becomes one of those things that when I'm asking a question, I want to try to frame my answer in the form of a question. So, for example, why would they hop to the other side? Why would they block this hip? Well, then it's like, well, why would they try to limit the mobility from this side? Or, looking along those lines. Now, again, when you're in a conversation, yes, you may turn this into a pure sentence, and there's nothing wrong with that. But this is one of those things is that in your head, if you're thinking of this revolving loop, that it's always going to kind of circle around, and whatever decision-making process that you prefer to use is perfectly fine. If you want to use, for example, OODA loop, you can use that. If you want to use any of these other ones, then that will make sense as well. But again, whatever makes the most sense for you. So realistically, I haven't really gotten to this equation fully yet. And we're going to do that over time. Again, this is part of where, like, a lot of my research over the past couple of years, working on figuring out, is there an easier way to kind of be able to start to address or look at some of these other principles of, how can I escape? Or, how do these moves somewhat tie together? And so, for all intents and purposes for this one right now, we're just going to go ahead and say, in this case, we're looking at the left upper arm. So right now, we're trying to, Camp in this case is trying to separate the head and the left upper arm of John away from his right. And realistically, what we were talking about last night is that we are ultimately trying to decrease the amount of what somebody can actually do in some kind of fitness quality or capacity to ultimately restrict their movement pattern, which will limit and movement control or motor control, which will restrict how much mobility they have, which ultimately puts them into a compromising position where they may have to submit. Again, they're going to make that decision. So again, that's going to be on the side of the person that's trying to establish this platform of control. And then for the person on the other side, obviously it's now we have to kind of work out of, well, let's not put ourselves completely in that compromising position. Let's increase our mobility. Let's increase our motor control, and so that way, or in movement patterns, so that way we can go ahead and then, apply some other kinds of qualities to it, whether it's strength, explosiveness, flexibility, moving, all of these other kinds of pieces that, actually kind of play into this. So again, we're establishing right now in this specific video, because I can't use like a teleprompter and Telestrator for this. We're establishing right now, Camp is trying to do a head-arm triangle of John's left, his head and his left arm, more so specifically his left upper arm. In some of our terminology, the way we'll talk about it is, again, either left shoulder, or we can even just go ahead and say left humerus. We kind of use it interchangeably with that. So then we're going to go ahead and start to look at, again, he's hopped over to the opposite side. So now the near side to this realistically has now become the left side for the left hip. The near hip would be the left hip off of this as well, for the left arm. So again, we haven't gone over the full equation, but we're going to go ahead and now say, we have to start looking at opposite joints and how this can kind of play into this. So left upper arm, right hip, and more so specifically, then we're going to tie this back and go, let's go diagonally across from that. And we're going to go ahead and say now below the left knee. And why this starts to become important, because realistically, a lot of this equation will ultimately come down to, again, just kind of putting the cat out of the bag, is left upper arm, right hip below the left knee to the right forearm. So realistically, the control points are going to become the left upper arm and the right upper leg, more so, again, the femur and the hip. The escape points for John will now become below the left knee and also the right forearm. So again, we would also classify some of these defenses as before, during, after. Realistically, this is now in the during and after, so therefore it's, this is when we're getting into a bad spot. So this is how a lot of this is going to start to tie together. So we've kind of use a reference in the same case, and if we can try to do a similar thing or do the same thing, we will try to do it. However, again, there truly is never the same thing, because time and space is always changing. However, so we can just go ahead and say that to make it easier for us to understand, but we're going to try to mirror and make this as similar as possible. In this case, Camp right now has his left knee bent and his right leg long, so John right now has just mirrored the position of his feet to be able to start to play into this. So as this is going to start to go, he's going to start to move his right leg back in for a second, if need be, to establish in. But his goal right now is, as we said before, left upper arm, right hip, below the left knee. So now John is trying to use below his left knee to control Camp's below his left knee, or at least start to do something that can inhibit the movement pattern or the mobility of this, which in this case, if he is able to go ahead and do this, and establish some kind of control off of here, it should actually increase the mobility of what is currently being controlled, which is the left upper arm and the head. So as this plays out, he extends. When this is happening off of here, and again, being transparent, we're looking at a very static position as you're practicing this. But again, as this is more dynamic, once you start applying these kind of things too, you never really get to settle fully into this position, and or practicing completely stacked movements. So you're going to start to see, again, we've established control of below the left knee. Right now, John is now winning the battle of below the left knee against Camp's below the left knee. So therefore, John actually has more mobility of his left upper arm. Camp's arm, as you saw before, is completely tied up, going to the head arm triangle. And this is where, again, squeezing may actually be detrimental, applying a quality in a position where he can't actually fully apply it. So once this starts to happen, again, John's now going to go ahead and look below the left knee as part of the escape. Then he's also going to start to use his right forearm. And as we know, kind of here, if you want to think of this as, similar but different, it's not the same exact kind of position. You're going to be looking at the fact that he has he's got an underhook with his right arm to Camp's left side. Camp does not have a whizzer or an overhook to counter out of this. So realistically, there could be a scramble that is possibly generated, or also ability to take his back. Again, there's a very simple way that we kind of classify and put a lot of these things together. That's for another time. But realistically, you'll start to see from here, he's going to start to come out. John has more mobility, so that way he can start to use more movement patterns with his left arm. Camp's arm is kind of tied up. And now John can go ahead and start to chase and climb and start to come up and try to take his back. In this case, for this demonstration purpose, he's able to look at a rear naked choke out of this position, belly down, and driving off of big toe on an angle, because jiu-jitsu or this kind of stuff comes back to angles, rotations, and asymmetries. So that way we're able to kind of set this up. So again, like 12 to 6, typically when we're trying to control somebody, is kind of bad. 3 to 9 isn't as bad as 12 to 6, but getting to that complete 90-degree angle may be beneficial to a point, but ideally, more often than not, when you look at a lot of these things and we actually start applying spatial awareness to it, we really get to some of these angles that are not directly 12, 3, 6, and 9, and those are generally going to be a little bit better. So off of that, we're able to kind of get that set and get that control. So again, this is just one of those defenses. I was asked, well, what if somebody hops over to this side? And and again, because that's the majority of how a lot of this stuff goes, things that are not covered in this video that I would normally kind of talk about. First things first is try to exhale, relax as much as possible, because again, this is one of those things that in before, during, and after, this is one where you want to try to be able to stay as relaxed as possible. So again, if you tense up, we're going to restrict movement. We want to have as much movement and mobility as possible. So in this case, we're going to exhale. We're going to try to, look at, our training partner in this case, and being able to see what's everything come in front. Then we're also going to go ahead and look at some of these other principles of maybe either a posterior pelvic tilt or a pelvic floor engagement, where we're doing like doing a bathroom dance, like, hey, don't pee your pants, or that kind of stuff. So that way we get some of those deep muscles engaged. Then we're going to try to mirror as much as we can, and then it becomes, all right, can we win the battle somewhere else where we're losing it or not necessarily favorable? Again, in this case, when he hopped over, John is losing the head-arm triangle battle, so we're just going to go ahead and try to win it at some of these other points, and especially those escape points, because if, again, when we start looking at position before submission, it's, I think if we add in that step, or, control before submission, if we start to say like, position, limit the possibility of escape, and then submission kind of finds itself, because again, when you start to limit those escape points, as your training partner or opponent start to move, it actually increases, decreases the slack and increases the tension on the control of what you're trying to do. So again, we get that leg extended out, we mirrored that position. The only thing that's a little bit different right now is John's right knee is now bent again, but he's going to use that to try to, push away. Again, these are things that as you eventually get to practice, it'll be important. But the more that you can start to see, like, hey, can I try to mirror this position? Because again, he's, head down. So this is one of those, last ditch kind of ones that now you're seeing John's mirroring the position to be able to actually start to come out, and worst case scenario, he's not necessarily going to take the back, but he's out of a really, really bad position, or possibly out of a bad position. And then he's able to go ahead and start to, get the game going again. In this case, he comes back, and you'll see that he's actually, again, mirroring the position, but he's kind of rotating, more to his right side, because Camp is rotating towards his right side. Both people's legs are long. Camp's left arm is slightly extended. John's is slightly extended, but he's got a set for an underhook if he needs to go to a forearm battle, and try to win the forearm battle off of that. And then we just get there and we get the control. So this is one of those ones where I kind of wanted to jump on and do this, because again, it's a little bit late. We're kind of jumping into this a little bit later. Hey, Professor Bobby, Jamie, what's up? Hi, Kyle. So I think this becomes one of those things that as you start to see technique, and as I go over a little bit more for you and give you a little bit more stuff of this, it's, again, everything works. It's just another way of looking at it, that hopefully as you look at techniques and start to see some of this stuff and using some of the framework, if you're interested in more of what I've put together, it's you can either look at georgesamuelson.com, but it'll redirect you. You can go to integralcombatmethods.com. That's, again, integralcombatmethods.com, where a lot of that stuff of what I've kind of put together over the past couple of years is available. And, we'll throw a couple more videos and content together. There's been a lot of great content today of at-home workouts and things to work on and great questions and answers. And again, shout out to everybody that's putting everything out there, because, again, it's a scary, trying time for a lot of people and small businesses, and and again, people not sure about if they're going to be able to pay their bills or get food, or when are they going to get to train, or even more so, it's just de-stress, because there's a lot of stressful times kind of going on right now. So, again, shout out to everybody that's really kind of putting stuff together and trying to put a smile on your face. And again, trying to do the same. If you have any questions, feel free to leave a comment, whether you're looking at it on Facebook, you're looking at it on YouTube. I'll try to answer it. And if you got stuff directly, feel free to, message me, and I'll try to cover that in the future. So again, hope this stuff helps you out. Thanks for tuning in, and I will talk to you soon.